Hello guys, Jared here again, and I'm going to do a review on the third film featuring the Monsieur Hulot character, as well as the fourth film overall directed by Jacques Tati, and that is Playtime. So yes, I've looked up, the plot of Playtime, because basically, Jacques Tati's films in general don't have much of a plot, but this one in particular doesn't really have a plot. So like, so I found it kind of hard to describe what the movie is about. But looking at the back, it it says that Tati stars as the hapless Hulot who ambles through the massive metropolis specifically constructed for the film. And that's a good way of saying it. And on IMDb, it says the plot is that Monsieur Hulot curiously wanders around a high-tech Paris, paralleling with a group of American tourists. Meanwhile, a nightclub/restaurant prepares its opening night, but it's still under construction. So I think those are the best ways to describe the movie, really. And even though this film doesn't really have a plot, which could be like a negative to people, this is actually my favourite of Jacques Tati's films, and even though it's actually my favourite, I wouldn't recommend watching this one first because I think it can be an acquired taste because of the fact there's no real plot. I think you kind of have to get used to his world first before you watch this. So I'd recommend, if you haven't seen any of his films first, I'd recommend maybe starting with Jour de Fête, or in English it's called The Big Day, because this was the first feature film he directed. Or you could start with the Les Vacances de Monsieur Hulot, which is the first film he did with the character of Monsieur Hulot, who is his most famous character. So yeah, and he directed 6 movies, and 4 of those movies had Monsieur Hulot. It's just his first and last film that didn't have the Monsieur Hulot character in them. So, like, I've heard apparently Jacques Tati originally didn't want this to be a movie with the Monsieur Hulot character. Apparently he just wanted it to be a separate movie, but the studio, I think, made him want to put the character in because that was just his signature character. But I think it works better having that character in it because what I really love about the character is, and this was in the previous films he did with the character, is that he's just very like fascinated by the world around him, and it's just I like seeing him like kind of exploring this like high tech world that he's in, and like the scene where he's in the waiting room and like they have like these like chairs that like these like spongy bits on the chairs, and he like pushes it down and then it springs back up, and he's very fascinated by that. And they have these big tech machines and stuff, and the buildings and everything and the machinery is just really great in the movie, and I really enjoyed that. And another thing I should point out is, if you can see like from the pictures on the back, the film is in colour, but they kind of got a black and white feel to it because of how much like grey they used for it, and there's very little like red in the movie, which was deliberate because they wanted it to have kind of a black and white feel. The only time there's really red is when there's like this red glowing button like on the machinery. That's the only real time you have red in the movie. So yeah. And I am glad that he used the Monsieur Hulot character for this, but I also like how it's not as focused on him as the previous films he did with that character. It kind of has just like it also focuses on lots of these tourists, American tourists coming to London, to Paris, not when, but you have like there's a few times where there's people who kind of are dressed like Monsieur Hulot who are kind of mistaken for being him, which is pretty funny. And I love like the scene at the restaurant where you have bits where there's like this crown thing on the back of the chairs, and then but the problem is it makes like a mark on the back of people's like coat, and that's just really funny when you first see that. But and then later it's still funny when you see people walking around and they still have like the kind of crown on the back of them. And another one of the funniest gags in the movie is that bit there where you can see Monsieur Hulot's going through like the glass like door into the restaurant or the nightclub. It says, and he like smashes the door down, and there's the guy there who's holding like the handle to the door, and he's like that. But then when Monsieur Hulot smashes the door down, he's still like holding it and moving it like that, pretending that there's still a glass door there. I found that very funny as well. And I love also in like the restaurant scene where like the waiter is pouring champagne for like this group of women who have like these weird like hat things, and like from like the shot where it kind of looks like he's pouring champagne into their hat things on their head. That was a pretty funny joke as well. Now, I said when I reviewed the other two films with the previous two films with the Monsieur Hulot character, Monsieur Hulot's Holiday and My Uncle, I said that they really make you feel like you've gone back to 1950s France. And this one was made quite a few years after My Uncle. This was 1967. My Uncle was in 1958. So 9 years later. So obviously it's in the 60s. The other two felt very much like the 50s, but this one is very like kind of futuristic and I guess kind of in a 60s way, but it's also very timeless. I mean, I liked, the 50s aspect of those previous films, but I do also like the timelessness of this film. So yeah, it feels like it could have been made in any time period. Another thing, well, one like kind of thing is I think the music isn't quite as memorable as the music for Monsieur's Holiday or My Uncle. I mean, the music is good, but I don't find it as memorable as the other two. Like when I think of Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, the first song I think is and when I think of My Uncle, I think of whereas like the music for this isn't quite, I don't associate it as much with the movie. So yeah, I said this came out in 1967, and then a year later in 1968 there was a film that came out that was very heavily inspired by Jacques Tati, and that was the film The Party. And I definitely recommend this film if you like Jacques Tati films. And I'd also say if you like this, I'd recommend the Jacques Tati films, because this is about, in this movie, Peter Sellers' character basically kind of wanders around the party, and there's no real plot. It's just like funny things going on as he wanders around the party. It's similar to how, Monsieur Hulot kind of wanders around in this movie. This came out a year after this movie, so I'm not sure if this was out by the time this was in production, because I think films took longer to make back then. But yeah, this was definitely heavily inspired by Jacques Tati. So overall, this is an absolutely great film. It's my favourite Jacques Tati film. If you haven't seen any of his films, I wouldn't recommend watching this first. I'd recommend watching his other films so that you get used to his style. But after you've watched his other films, I think if you liked his other films, I think you'll really like this. But I think you do have to have seen his other films first to get into this film, because you have to get into his world, basically. So, thanks for watching this review, and stay tuned for my review of his next film with the Monsieur Hulot character, Trafic. So, see ya.